Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean and Michael and Lori doing production. We appreciate y'all having us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll do some introductions. We've got slides for those. So let me just pick the screen here. All right. Slideshow. So today the talk is about openstates.org, which is a 13 plus year old project provides open data for legislation tracking, research, and analysis. I'm Jesse Mortensen, CTO of Plural and Open States. My pronouns are he or they. I am coming to you from my home in Minneapolis, but don't worry, we have Chicago bona fides on the team. And I have the wonderful smell of sauteing onions wafting up as my partner does some cooking downstairs. So I'm getting very hungry over here. And let me also, Christopher, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Christopher. I am a data engineer here on the team, on our distributed team. And so while Jesse is there in Onion City, Minneapolis, I am currently visiting family in Philadelphia, but I am a Chicago resident myself. And my pronouns are also he or they, and very excited to be joining y'all tonight.
Thank you, Christopher. If you don't recognize the name, we rebranded just 2 weeks ago from Civic Eagle to Plural. So that's where Plural is coming from. And we're going to get into some of the history of the project and different folks who have shepherded the project over the years. But to give you a quick snapshot, Open States project has been around since 2009. It was founded by James Turk, also currently a Chicago resident. He's now doing some teaching at the U Chicago. Not sure if he's watching on the live stream, but couldn't join for talking. And he's still our founder emeritus. So we have several members from the team living in Chicago. Plural started in 2015 as a new startup oriented towards trying to bring technology to the problem of making democracy more accessible, more transparent. I have 2018 on there with a little code snippet from the very first time that we had some code targeting the Open States API and we started as a user of Open States. And then in 2021, there was this opportunity to really kind of adopt the project and make sure it had the material backing to continue being a project for hopefully long into the future. So that's us, Plural. We're the Open States company. Quick overview of the timeline there. And I want to introduce the project a little bit by talking about the laboratories of democracy. This is a paraphrase from a Supreme Court justice that is thrown around quite a bit to talk about U.S. policy making and how much is devolved to all of the states and how many different experiments are being run in the laboratories of democracy in each and every state. And sometimes those experiments look like this, very orderly, very serious. I think this scientist is working on curing cancer, if I recall the source. And sometimes those experiments look like this. And which one it looks like may depend on your background, your perspective, your experience of life. But we know both are happening, right? We've seen really big impacts happen through state level policymaking, whether in the wake of Supreme Court decisions, in anticipation of the need to address climate change, in the light of sort of federal inaction, around censorship issues that are playing through state levels and localities, immigration and immigrant rights, all kinds of issues where state level policymaking makes a huge difference and impacts people's lives. And a lot of people for whom those impacts are felt, but for whom there's no equivalent voice or representation. And that's a problem. And that's one of the reasons that Open States exists, is to bring transparency and light to this, especially the chaotic and complex picture of state level policymaking. That's the big part of the origin of the project. So we've got these laboratories of democracy, and I asked, who's keeping track of those experiments? Is there anybody out there that keeps track? So I want you to just jump back in time with me really quick and imagine, it's 2009. You're clicking through about 50 government websites to track all this stuff. So whether that's the Alabama legislature or the Illinois General Assembly, there's no standard here in the United States for how states provide information about policymaking. There's no requirement that that data be open and easy to access. It is public data, but sometimes, and so usually these states do provide it in some way, shape, or form, but that way, shape, and form varies considerably. It's really a wild west out there. And so that was the genesis of open states, right? So 2009, open states happened to provide a resource that allows you to search a single resource, query a public API, download and analyze bulk data so that people can make sense of all these experiments happening in the laboratories of democracy. So that's in a nutshell, open states, the best and oldest source of US legislative data. And the cool thing, the thing that I'm really proud of in adopting and working on this project over the last couple of years is that there are millions of people who are engaging with democracy through openstates.org. Just looking at the last year, we're looking at a couple million people who have come to the site. Some are just looking for, you see that first listing, find your legislator, right? So we've got lots of people just coming to find out who represents them, but also lots of people who are looking at specific bills. They might hear about a policy proposal or a policy topic in the news, try Googling for it and end up at openstates.org. So it's a really cool and precious thing. I think anytime somebody takes a little bit of energy and attention to policymaking and democratic process, because that takes a commitment, right? Even if it's at a very amateur or starter level, like it's really a big deal, I think, and take that responsibility super seriously to provide access to everybody. In addition to individual web visitors, we've got a bunch of organizations, journalists, researchers that have integrated with OpenStates data, have pulled OpenStates data in to look at. And these are just like a few of those, but it's another really cool impact to look back over the history of the project and see how many people have built really cool tools on top of that open data. So this could be you next. Just want to share a few quick quotes from people we recently, at the end of last year, just did some queries out to people who are some of our API users, and just kind of ask, hey, what are you using our data for? And these are a few of the projects, the responses that came back about projects. So whether it's people who are doing data visualization, people who are trying to understand the connections between bills and people who are sponsoring bills, people are just trying to connect folks who are members of community institutions, public school districts, to figure out who to connect to in the legislature. These are the kind of projects that OpenStates supports. And also just give you a little context, right? Like OpenStates is not the only project around kind of like policy making broadly in the US that provides open or free data. And so just want to share a few others. Open Secrets, I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with, has a really great API and some open data about money and politics. If you're looking for donors, contributions, PACs, like that's your source. ProPublica does amazing journalism. They've got a Congress API that's pretty good, although OpenStates also now has congressional data. But they have a lot of other data projects as well. Ballotpedia, which keeps track of who's running for offices, doesn't really have the structured open data. Doesn't have a free API, but they do have a lot of good just information and narrative form around who's running for office. Awesome. And you might be asking, who's Plural? Why is this random company supporting or kind of running the Open States project? So I want to give you a really quick introduction to us before we dive into the technical stuff. Plural was founded by our CEO and COO, Damol and Yemi, with a couple other folks. As I mentioned back in 2015, 2016, as they were looking around at US politics, turbulent times, obviously it's continued to be so. But we're kind of struck with that question of how can we use technology to make a difference, right? It felt like a calling for them, and there's been a lot of learning along the road since then. It's been a lot of years, but basically around 2018, the company pivoted to working on a focus on legislative data, and that's what brought us to have the reason to be using OpenStates API in the first place is building tools to help connect people who are doing policy advocacy work to the data and give them tools to save them time and focus on, if you're a public policy advocate, you don't want to be spending hours copying, pasting stuff into spreadsheets and sharing things on email lists. Like, you want to be, representing the voice of your constituents, your members, your agenda, and focusing on that part of the job. So we are helping people do that job. Since then, we've grown quite a bit. We are now a 39-person company. We're remote first. We have folks here mostly in the US, also in Nigeria and in Colombia. We are a venture capital backed startup. So that's kind of a unique business model that we bring to this space, is that we are a high growth venture backed startup. We decided that Open States, gave us an opportunity to innovate, and we wanted to give back by making sure that the project continues. So a little bit more detail on that history. Open States started in 2009, coming out of PyCon, which is a national technical conference. The project got support early on from the Sunlight Foundation, and that really helped provide stable funding for several years that got the project up, got a lot of tools built. Again, founder James Turk, as well as other folks in the early years, built a ton of what you see today as Open States. Around 2016, the Sunlight Foundation closed its Sunlight Labs. I think Sunlight Foundation is now inactive generally, but Sunlight Labs, which had hosted Open States, had closed. There are a few years where the project continued as an independent effort, but by 2021, we kind of heard the news from James that it was looking for new paths forward, new ways to keep supporting it, and that's where we stepped in and said, hey, this helped us in our startup years, and from 2018, we're going to make sure that this continues to be a resource for other folks. Really quick, like I said, our customers are people who have public policy teams that goes across the spectrum, national, state level, commercial and for-profit or nonprofit, and advocacy groups, membership groups. Anybody who's got a professional policy team, we provide tools that make that work a lot easier. All right, let's get into some of the fun stuff. So Open States data is going to be available in several different forms. So if you are someone who's just curious about learning more about state level policymaking, national policymaking, maybe you've got an advocacy group already and you're interested in using our tools to drive reports, analysis. Maybe you've got a cool tool that you think you could connect some other policy data to automatically look up and link to legislation that might relate to it, right? So that's where our bulk data, our API are going to come in handy. And we have all kinds of projects built on top of these resources, and encourage you to absolutely start one and reach out to us and get working on it. So let me first just kind of show you the website. I'm going to get out of presentation mode. First way to interact with the data is just to use the web UI, right? This is meant to be really accessible for pretty much anybody. So if you're interested in legislation, you can just go to the website, pick your state, and start poking around. Find who represents you, browse through recently introduced bills. You can actually create an account in here. And I'm just going to pick a random, this is just a resolution. But one thing you can do is you can follow that bill and do very basic but very useful bill tracking right here on openstates.org. So if you are doing whether it's a teeny amount or some amount of just lobbying, you care about what policy might be moving in your state, you can follow some bills in here and you'll get updates via email when there are changes to those bills. So you can kind of know where it's going and get in touch with your representatives to lobby for or against it. So the web interface is a great way to interact with our data. We also have an API. And so if you're technical and you want to start interacting with it, it's free. All you got to do is go to the website, create an account. If you register an account at openstates.org and confirm your account, then on your account page, you'll be able to create an API key. So that would allow you to interact with the API. We've got docs at openstates.org, which includes a link to our Swagger docs, so you can actually interact with that API right in here. I'm going to switch screens really quick to grab my demo key. But But let me just very quickly give you an introduction, and we'll see what comes up in questions if we want to go into some more details on what's in the API. But quick concepts, we've got a set of jurisdictions. A jurisdiction is basically a state in most cases. So let's say we want to get all the states back. Paste our API key in there, hit execute, and you can see some of the data we're getting back. Another thing that's important to know is that we've got this concept of legislative sessions. So each session, which in some states is 2 years, some states is 1 year, is represented as an individual legislative session. You can also get that back with the jurisdictions list, and get a sense of the identifiers that you need to be able to pull up bills that are associated with that jurisdiction. Let's see if we can wait and get this to pull up, huh? The hazards of live demoing. There we go. Okay, so here's a jurisdiction response with a bunch of sessions. So for instance, let's find Illinois. Scroll down to a more current session. Okay, so this legislative session has a unique identifier called the 103rd, and it's unique for Illinois, right? So that's specific to that. And let's scroll down. Let's actually get some bills in this jurisdiction. Let's open up bill search. Let's try it out. Go Illinois, session identifier. Might have to grab my API key one more time. Let's do that. Now let's see if we can get a response back here. There we go. Awesome. So we've got results, and you're just going to, by default, get a list of, paginate a list of all the bills. Let's look at some of this in detail. You can see that this is in Illinois. It's in the Senate. We can see that it's a bill. Where is our title? Illinois has some very funny bill titles, and I would love in the Q&A if anybody has an explanation for Illinois' bill titles. I would love to know more. They're kind of like subjects, but very unique in terms of the national picture of bill titles. So that's a really quick look at our API, and I can go into more details, but I'll stop there. In addition, there is bulk data. So I'm going to show this off by way of hopefully reconnecting to my Colab Python Jupyter notebook here. So let's say you're a data scientist, you're just doing some analysis on bulk data about legislation. We've got a example Python notebook that you can find in our GitHub. So this is open states from the Hackathon 2023 repository. There's a notebook in here that you can follow that I just loaded into Google Colab. So this is something that anybody can try without having to have stuff installed. And it's a whole, quick tutorial like that'll end up with, generating a list of kind of like predicted topics coming out of the bill text. This particular example uses Minnesota data. I'm going to go back up to the top to kind of show you where we pull that data in. So you can see we start with a zip file that's available at data.openstates.org. And this particular one is Minnesota's 2021-2022 session. But this just gives you an example, like that's the kind of bulk data that we use that you could load into data analysis and play with it. So again, I'm not going to go into details. We'll see what questions come up. But I wanted to give you an idea of the data picture, and I'll go really quick to our data page to just show off some of the data that we have in there. So this is all bulk data. You don't need to have a key for most of it. You can get bulk data about legislators, about bills and votes, geographic data. You can even get SQL dumps if you want to get a little more detailed. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see what time we're at. Do we have a few minutes for Christopher to talk about contributing code?
Yeah, I think we do.
Awesome, great. Christopher, want to take it away and talk about our open source code and repositories and how people get plugged in there?
Most definitely. And Jesse, would you mind resharing your screen just to pull that up, since one of the reasons why my video isn't on is I've been having some internet issues today, so don't want anything to get glitchy here. But Jesse can show you what our repo looks like while I talk a bit about what contributions can look like. So there are a bunch of different ways. One of the great things about our project is not only is it open data, but it is open source. So if you're wanting to just continue to, be a part of open source projects and contribute to the quality of this project, some of, I would say, all of our most substantive contributors are folks who are also using the data because they understand exactly and intend to identify issues when things are coming up, and also areas for improvement while using the data. So one way that can look is when it comes to politician data. So if you scroll down there you'll see some of our pinned repos here. We have our people data repo. And that was, you saw on the website there where you could get the different legislator files, and those are in YAML files. And so you see these broken down by our jurisdictions, which are for the most part states, but we also have Puerto Rico and DC. And then you can go into Illinois here, and some of you who may be following Illinois legislature issues may know Aaron Ortiz, but you can see all of these attributes of the legislator Aaron Ortiz, broken down, gender, email, get that image file, etc. These are all very useful if you're wanting to reach out, for instance, to a legislator, but also just to be able to incorporate into whatever kind of project that you're using, being able to funnel this data into your project and fold it in, integrate it. So our people data, if you are going through there and you may notice there might be an issue, there might be something that, we are not perfect, we do our best, but occasionally, even if you're getting it directly from the source, sometimes the source isn't always accurate. And so we are always eager for folks to let us know if you are in the middle of a project having to do with Illinois legislature or any other jurisdiction. You may be engaging in some manual data gathering on the internet, filling out a document. Definitely let us know. And you can do that by directly reaching out to one of us. You can go to the issues repo, which is one area where issues are opened here. And Jesse, actually, I'm not sure about our permissions. Are there permissions on who can create an issue within there?
Anybody can create an issue.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you can create an issue. Any contributor can let us know if you think, we need to address something within the people repo, but there's also a very important repo that any of you, and I think many of you, are quite versed in web scraping. If you are interested in looking at the kind of web scraping that we're doing and finding ways to improve upon it, this is our OpenState Scraper repo. There's two big overarching directories within that, the scrapers and scrapers next. Within our scrapers directory there is where we do a lot of our bill scraping, but also getting votes and events, those sorts of things. Again, everything is broken down by jurisdiction. So we got our bill scraper here for Illinois. And so you definitely may want to take a look at that. And if you see anything, and you can run that as well using the documentation on the openstates.org documentation site to guide you. But you may want to contribute to that. So there may already be issues that you're interested in that are posted already. But again, feel free to look through the code base if you're someone who is well versed in Python or just getting started. Oftentimes that beginner's mind tends to notice things that others might just gloss over. So writing scrapers and contributing to politician data, people data, but also even contributing to our website. Let's say you're a front-end developer and you're really interested in that, spending some time on openstates.org, and you think there are ways that we could really improve that interface. We would love your input on that and would love your support in that. And is there anything, Jesse, you would like me to add on that front? Oh, well, I will say as well, that if you're interested in getting started, you can reach out to either of us, but definitely I tend to do a lot of our interaction with our incredible contributor community. You can reach out to me at Christopher at pluralpolicy.com. And some of our most recent contributions as well have been on our committee scrapers and our event scrapers. The committee scrapers you will find in that Open State Scrapers repo within the Scrapers Next directory. That's where you'll find the people data scrapers as well as committee scrapers. For those of you who are familiar with the legislative process, you know just how important committees are to shaping what a bill ultimately looks like. So getting that important data on who is a member of these committees, what is happening within those committees, how can you reach out to those folks? It's a very crucial part of the advocacy process, but also for those who may be doing academic processes and projects, or just focusing on transparency within government. These are important scrapers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. That is a great intro to Scraper and demo. We'll end with our last slide here. Let's connect. As Christopher said, we'd love to have you interacting with the project, whether that's as a contributor, a user, either using the website or building tools on top of the API, or work with the bulk data. Here's our contact info, and yeah, I'd love to hear what kind of questions folks have.
Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed that. That was really great. We definitely have some audience questions coming in. Michael, is it good if I take the first one?
Go for it.
Awesome. Cool. So an audience question, somebody remarked, they're just happy to see that Open States is alive and well, just like that's been going around that's been on for so long. But wanted to ask, what are some top takeaways for what has worked well and what's not worked well over time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've only been working with the product for a few years, so there's a longer history here that I can't speak to super well. But I have, tried to learn the stories from James and take away some of the lessons earned over the years. The biggest, in terms of like just day to day keeping on top of the data, the biggest challenge is that we're pulling from 50 plus data sources, really hundreds, because we've got different endpoints within each jurisdiction that we're pulling from. The hardest part is that any of that can change at any time, right? And so one of the things that works well is just trying to be nimble and responsive and trying to stay on the data as best as we can. And in the bigger picture, right, like the project's gone through a number of iterations from early years that were really kind of like in, one of the civic tech phenomenon kind of goes up and down a little bit. Hack Night is such a great institution because y'all have kept it steady for quite a while here and kept this drumbeat going. But there's definitely been ups and downs across the country in terms of like how many volunteers are coming out to write scrapers. And when it started, there was this clear, huge need for just transparency around this data that just didn't exist before that. And there have been times when we've had influxes and times when we've had foundation funding and haven't. So really, like, to me, the biggest thing that I look back at the history and I think what works the best is just being resilient and being willing to change and try new things, and the impact, there's a big impact from just like one or two people making decisions to contribute and to be accountable to making sure something like this continues to exist. Like, if it wasn't for James saying, hey, I'm just, after Sunlight closes it, I'm going to take on the project to keeping this banner aloft. Like, if it wasn't for him doing that for several years, like, it wouldn't be around. And I'd say if it wasn't for our company, if it wasn't for like GovHawk, which is one other company in the same policy tool space, like out of, lots of competitors, right? Like two companies out of lots of competitors in that space, to decide, hey, like, I'm going to do something other than just the most profit-driven thing. I'm going to contribute back to open data. It makes a big difference, right? So that's my other lesson is like, the decision to contribute to the commons and stick with it for a little bit makes a big impact.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's maybe on that note of kind of the ups and downs of contributors and volunteers. who help out with the project. Perhaps more pragmatic question from the audience. On that note, are you looking for 1L law students as summer interns? And if so, how can they contact you?
I will say, in short, yes. We do have an active intern program, and our interns provide really important work. Our interns are part of our research, our policy research team, and do for Plural, they do work that directly impacts open states, which is some of the like kind of QA and like finding and making sure we're representing the process correctly and like helping us get into the nuance and make sure we've got the data captured correctly. They also help us with our research efforts that go into features for our commercial product. So yeah, we do have an active internship program. The best, we actually have a meeting tomorrow to discuss whether we should open another position. So I will say, tweet at us at Open States, or write into to me. I'm just Jesse at pluralpolicy.com, and those are two good ways to get our attention.
Awesome. So you mentioned kind of earlier on in your last question, maintaining like hundreds of different data sources that change without you knowing. With that in mind, have there been like, maybe not naming, but like what kind of challenges have you faced about like states like keeping their own data up to date? And like, has that been difficult over different years or even across leadership transitions? Like what are some of the challenges that has come up with that?
Yeah, I can definitely think of some. Christopher, I also want to ask, is that you're pretty hands-on with scrapers week to week, so I wanted to see if you had any off the top of your head to mention there.
I mean, I would say just a very minimal, but the most recent example that I can think of is how long it's been taking, given the most recent flip of the leadership, like you mentioned there, Sean, that the flip of the leadership in the Pennsylvania House, in the House chamber of Pennsylvania, now that that's democratically controlled and they need all new committee assignments, it's just taken a long time to get all of those committee assignments posted. So as someone who is very excited to see us go from 99% to 100% coverage on having all of our committees collected, that's one of those things. But that plus, oftentimes with anyone who's familiar with the web scraping, just how much a huge aspect of that is how often these sites can change, little formatting issues that become a huge part of the job. So even if it isn't necessarily the data that's changing, just the formatting can change the whole process and completely derail your day. But I'll let Jesse answer those other sort of data issues.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, kind of taking a step back from the particulars of scraping a particular page, there's a long history of, negotiations and indirect interactions with offices that run these state legislative websites, who I'm sure are all people doing the best they can with the resources they have, right? So this is not in any way a criticism of all those state employees doing the best that they can. But it's really varied, and some of these sites just don't run super well, and there might be 20,000 bills, right? So how do we in a timely fashion get the bill data in so people get notified about changes happening when, in like Massachusetts, for instance, the scraper's got to go slow enough that we're taking it might take 20 hours sometimes to fully scrape updates from all the bills in that jurisdiction. So between those kind of performance issues to a few states here and there who are trying to put up blockers to block web scraping, there's just sort of a dance with all these different data sources.
Great, thank you. I guess kind of the follow-up question I had on that was, have there been any instances, and maybe you can't name names or name states, but any instances of any states actually making things easier specifically for open states and for your work, like making scraping easier, just providing you the data more directly?
Yeah, good question. And if James was here, you could speak to that a little better, since there was a big project. I'm not sure exactly how many years ago, but kind of in the middle of Open State's history, there was a big effort to say hey, this problem, the need for this was created by the fact that there's no standard and there's no like national direction on how states make this data available. And folks from open states at that time tried pretty hard to get a few states to move like through the kind of rulemaking and policy setting process towards better openness and more structured data. And what I've heard from James is that it's a very mixed at best result from those efforts. It's very slow to make those changes happen. And in at least one case, he told me that the API that the state resulted in producing actually was very incomplete. Like, so they created a new API like at the end of this effort, and it was missing important data that otherwise was on the website. And so it actually, open states kept scraping the website, even though that new API was put out there. So that's a bummer. I wish the story was better on that front. It would certainly be better for government to produce this kind of structured data that citizen groups need to do this kind of understanding. But that said, there are a couple states with pretty good APIs. New York has a pretty good API. We work with that, and it's pretty nice.
One comical anecdote on that, and this isn't necessarily to name names because this isn't in dragging them or anything, but I was on Mississippi's legislative website a few months ago, and while they do have data that is just in the most basic form of some PDFs at times, I was looking for some sources and I clicked on some of their bill and legislator data, and it just circled back to the Open States website. So pointed back to us. So yeah, in a way that was helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see. Oh yes, okay. So is there, let me rephrase this. Is there any data that within open states that like probably feels the most exciting to you, or I don't know, somebody out there looking for a project, looking for some inspiration, maybe just a little bit of direction? Like what data comes to mind for you for that?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to jump on the hype cycle, I would call attention to data that you can get that's text, right? Like the stuff that's happening around generative AI and large language models is really cool, right? Like these off-the-shelf tools are allowing you to interact with and analyze text in ways that just weren't possible before the last year. And so one of the things you can do is pull abstracts from our bill data and try to get us, try to see if you can summarize it through one of these new models. We've got the links to the PDFs for each bill version, right? So you could download those PDFs, extract text, run it through that same, all that cutting edge text interpretation AI that's out there. So that's really cool, right? Because they're the biggest, like now that we've, Open States has been around for almost 14 years, so we've got a fair amount of transparency, at least around like where bills are moving, but there's still this incredible opacity within the text of bills. It's this, it takes so much time to read even a few bills and understand like what's in that bill. Like there's a lot of bills that are maybe one page and a lot of those don't really go anywhere, but the bills that matter tend to be substantial, right? Like a lot of them are 10 pages, 100 pages. So that's an area I'm really excited about as a frontier, is like applying AI to breaking down the text of the bill to give people an understanding of what's actually in there without having to spend all day reading that bill.
Very cool. Thank you. Yeah, you must have had in mind another question that came up in the chat, because somebody asked directly about that too, about using AI to summarize bills. So yeah, I guess another audience question is, do you all have any ways of promoting open states or keeping tabs on kind of local efforts that may be reduplicating some of the work that you all are doing kind of unknowingly, kind of keeping an eye on making sure some others aren't trying to kind of reinvent the wheel that you've invented?
That is a great, interesting question. And I think the answer is no, we don't have great ways of doing that yet. So I would love help with that. If you know of projects that you think overlap here or connect here, again, like tweet at us, like let us know what you're seeing. Yeah, another frontier I think down the line for us is to think like, what we have this repository data about policy, like what's officially happening in policy making, but I'd love to someday be able to connect that to policy impact data, right? Like, can we somehow, like, because there's so many projects, like people here in this group have done awesome data projects working on data that government agencies are producing. But it just seems like there's maybe a way that in the future we could kind of like connect that back to the policy making in a sort of structured way. That's a very high idea. I don't have anything specific on that, but yeah, any projects that seem like they're around this area, I'd love to hear about them, because we need more eyes looking for those connections.
Cool. Just a couple more audience questions here. Let's see. Someone says, what's the best way to like kind of maintain updates about like your political directory? Would it just be like submitting a GitHub issue? And they also asked about like, what's your fact checking process like?
Yeah, Christopher, do you feel like taking a crack at that?
Yeah, most definitely submit a GitHub issue if you know. And I mean, you don't need to submit one GitHub issue for every single, issue. If they're related, feel free to lump that into one overarching one if you notice a pattern of something that you think should be addressed or improved upon. But I will say, Sean, what was the second part of that question?
Just what like fact checking is like.
Oh yeah,
whether that's like yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we look to the source. The source of truth is the legislative website the vast majority of the time. However, that may not always be the case. And while Jesse might be able to answer more toward if there have been times in the past where we've needed to reach directly out to some of these folks, staffers at within legislatures, but in general, you just having to the scrapers are going to particular endpoints of these websites, but we may just need to bop around a little bit more manually to confirm whether something is accurate or not.
Yeah, let me add to that. The data checking, the quality control is one of the harder parts of the job, right? Because these hundreds of different sources. Our source of truth is the source, right? So as we scrape it, it tends to be, there's not like an automatic way. You write a second scraper to check your first scraper, then you write a third scraper to check your second scraper, right? Like it's that way lies madness. So it's a combination of those kind of manual checks Christopher mentioned, as well as some validation that happens in the front of the pipeline right after the scraper stage. And we have some like kind of internal dashboards that we monitor to see, looking for like anomalies as the data gets ingested over time, looking for obvious gaps. But it's definitely a challenge. And I'll say if you see one of those gaps and if you feel a little bit of interest, in addition to creating an issue, you can, especially if it's the people data, you can just go and find the YAML file for that legislator, edit that file in GitHub and submit a PR with that fix, and we can merge it in. Most cases pretty easily, but usually like we try to fix things at the scraper level, because that's the thing we can repeat and keep that value going.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just kind of going back to just the scraping and the data collection and issues that have come up or whatnot with that. I guess kind of overall, like what kinds of trends have you noticed in or have changed how the data is collected or updated? Would you say that the trend is kind of on making things easier, or is a trend more towards making things harder?
I think it's a mix. On one hand, we're seeing sites get a little more sophisticated. Like these sites don't change super often, right? When they do change, we don't get a heads up, right? So that's hard, but they don't change super often. And so we're slowly seeing kind of new sites getting redeveloped. And some of those are more sophisticated in that maybe there's an API, maybe there's just like a, sort of a back end endpoint that we can hit, to simplify the scraping a little bit. But at the same time, like that also means in some cases people are adopting Cloudflare, right, and trying to use more sophisticated ways to block scraping of data. And there we try to work with the webmaster in that state and see if we get whitelisted, but it's not always that easy.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions tonight. So with that, that'll probably wrap up this portion. in this presentation. Thank you so much to both of you. This is really great. There's one piece we didn't tell you that Michael and I have to do at the end of this presentation. We'll just do it. So with all that, remember to everyone listening, you can hop in. Thank you, Lori, to hop into the live stream at that link right there. Should be getting started in just a few minutes. Yeah, Michael, you have anything else before we sign off?
I think just the usual.
All right, everybody, here we go. Ready? All right, go forth and hack. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.